Pastor Mai, I'm Chris Pearson, and this is Manx Radio. This Saturday sees the island celebrating its second open to all and free Pride event. It'll also be celebrating the 30th anniversary since the island decriminalised homosexuality. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll be sharing the story of Charlie, who was administratively discharged from the Royal Air Force for revealing that he was gay. Just 6 months after he was forced from service, the UK rules changed, lifting the ban on serving gay personnel. This is Charlie's story.
So I'm Charlie Brown. Lived on the Isle of Man now since April 1999. Before that, I was a technician, a sergeant in the Royal Air Force.
Charlie, going back, you always had an interest in aircraft, but you didn't want to be a pilot, did you?
No, I come from a family of aircraft engineers. My mum and dad both worked at an aircraft factory, and I was always crazy on aeroplanes. But I knew I didn't have the aptitude to fly. But I used to take things apart as a kid. I didn't always used to put them back together. But and I always knew that I wanted to be an aircraft technician, but not in industry where my parents came from, in the Royal Air Force.
And you joined at a very young age.
I was a cadet in the Air Training Corps from the age I was allowed to be a cadet, and I actually handed in my uniform at the cadets on the evening of the day that I signed up to join the Royal Air Force, or signed on in the Royal Air Force. So yeah, that was all I wanted to do.
So literally cadet uniform in, RAF uniform on, training begins.
That's it.
And your life in the RAF, was it what you hoped it would be?
Yeah, I was very young, late developer, physically and mentally, and it was a bit of a whirlwind to start with. I worked on some little training jets to start with, only 50 miles from home, so I could go home every weekend. I got into motorbikes. I just enjoyed it and got on with it, and then was promoted and started to go through the ranks.
Now, the reason we're talking today is talking about your homosexuality and how that affected things later on in your career. Were you aware at that stage at all, or was it just not on your radar?
Totally not on my radar. I wasn't. I was a very young 16-year-old. I had no idea of my sexuality when I joined the Air Force. It wasn't until a couple of years later when I started to find to have a relationship with somebody very discreet behind locked doors. I knew at that time, very much so in the military, it wasn't allowed.
When we say that, that's a legal thing, wasn't it, at that stage? It
Yeah.
wasn't just something that was frowned on or put down or whatever. You would have been thrown out.
In the early 1980s in the military, you would go to military jail for it. Yeah, you would be court-martialed, you would go to a military jail, and then you would be discharged. And even there's other horror stories from other services with people going through electroshock treatment for it. And
this is the 1980s.
This was certainly the early and the mid 1980s. That was the case. So, everything was very, very discreet, massively discreet. But also I still hadn't recognised myself as being gay. To me, it was just something that happened after a few beers with a particularly good friend. It was I wasn't going to deal with it. It was my sexuality, and as far as I was concerned, it was I put it in kind of it was Pandora's box, and I'd deal with it another day, but certainly not today.
So you knew it was Pandora's box. You knew what was inside.
I had a good idea after a while what was inside, but I just delayed opening it. But I had another reason not to want to come out. My father at this point was in his 70s, was very old-fashioned, and I knew that he could not have handled me coming out, his only son being gay, and I knew that. So one of the deciding factors that I knew I could not come out was that it would destroy my father.
And that sounds, Charlie, more like you protecting him than yourself.
Yeah, I was protecting him, but also I certainly didn't want to lose my job. I loved my job. I just, by the mid-80s, I'd been promoted. I'd been posted onto a tornado squadron, and that was the latest thing, the new electric jet in the RAF. And I was too busy. Pandora's box could stay closed, and I was too busy enjoying myself, working hard, playing hard, going all over the world, and just getting on with it.
You mentioned your dad. You mentioned protecting your dad. There was an occasion when you went home and your parents thought you were going to say something else. What was the story there?
So I'd had my first tattoo. I was 25 years old, and I'd decided to have a drunken tattoo, and I had to tell my parents about it. Now, I always wore T-shirts, so it wasn't as if it was something I could hide. So I had a few beers on the train on the way home, a bit of Dutch courage, and then when I got home, I was fully intending to tell my parents that I'd got a tattoo, and some kind of distant uncle was round or something like that. And I think I said to my mum, I've got something to tell you, but it'll have to wait till later. I'll tell you after I've been to the pub. So I went off and met my schoolmates in the pub. And then when I came home, top of our street, all the lights were on in our house and our house only.
The only
and
house.
I got in and, my parents were sat there absolutely, waiting for this great revelation that I was going to come out with. And it was, I think I said something like, right, no good moaning, it's what I want, it's how it is. And I rolled up my sleeve and showed them my tattoo. And my mother said, bloody hell, I thought I was going to be a grandma. And my dad said, that's nothing. I thought he was going to tell us he was a shirt lifter. And I can kind of remember thinking, no, not today.
That's a story for another day.
Yeah, that's something for another day. Yeah, but that never happened. My dad actually died in 1998, and it was almost like a signal that it was. Yeah, I knew that I thought the world was changing enough.
Let's move the story on a little bit. Your military career is going well. You're working on Tornado, which was the fab new jet the RAF and others were operating at that stage. You get promoted. You're going on a course to become a sergeant, and that's probably the first time you had to sort of openly face potentially an awkward situation.
Yeah, sure. I was on a course with about 7 other guys, and the instructor, it was classed as a syndicate, and our little syndicate, our instructor was just having a general chat, and he wanted to know everyone in the room's opinions on, sooner or later, they're going to allow homosexuals in the military. What is your opinion of it? And this guy went around the room and asked us all. Now, this was, it was my worst nightmare, because I could feel myself going red. I didn't know what I was going to say, and I can't remember what some of the other guys said before me. And when it came to me, I don't know, like this just came from nowhere, like an old-fashioned bingo machine where the ball came into my mouth and I just read what was on it, and I said, "Oh, it's okay if they make it legal, but if they make it compulsory, I'll have to leave." And everybody laughed. And I could go red, and nobody thought anything of it. And I still don't know today where that came from, but I seem to dodge that bullet.
Which must have been a huge relief, because obviously you must have sat there for a while just thinking, where am I going here? Because if you're either not true to yourself,
yeah,
or you're going to be true to yourself, and this is going to start a chain of events you're not going to be able to control.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So let's just sort of take the story a little bit. Around about that time, you first started coming to, well, you've been to the Isle of Man before, but you first started coming regularly to the Isle of Man. What was it? I'm guessing bikes.
Yeah. Definitely. I love my bikes, love my bike racing. And, I'm quite partial to half a shandy on a warm day, so I like my pubs. And, the Isle of Man pub culture is legendary. And in the early 90s when I started coming here, Bushy's was the place to be. Bushy's on Victoria Street, melting pot of the world. Lots of different types of people in there, and I just felt like I'd found a bolt hole. So I used to come here, quite often, and I made a lot of friends.
But still, you hadn't come out. Nobody in that group of friends knew.
No, not a clue.
You were gay.
Not a clue. I still hadn't decided to go that far yet. I pretty much knew myself. I'd peeked into Pandora's box, but I knew what was in it. The year before Millennium, New Year's Eve. 1998, 99, I decided to tell one of my close friends over here that one thing I was gay, the other thing I kind of loved him, which was not an issue to him, but he wasn't gay, but or if he was, he's never admitted it.
Was he cool with that?
Yeah, he was really cool with that. But so was the jungle drums in the Isle of Man, as we know, go pretty quick. By the next day, everybody in the pub knew, and even it was just accepted. People knew me already, so they couldn't be prejudiced, and it just seemed that they just accepted me for who I was. and not what I was. And especially when you think that the Isle of Man's got such a poor track record. Yeah,
We look at Alan Shea and everything. It's not that long ago. So
no, it's not 30 years, isn't it, since the decriminalisation? But it was, everybody just was cool and accepted it.
What did that feel like to you at that stage? Because this must be the first time you've been honest with yourself, let alone anybody else.
Yeah, it was the reaction of others that seemed important to me, and the fact that everybody accepted it. It was, it was a massive relief. Unfortunately, then I went back to Germany, where I was based at the time on a frontline tornado squadron, and I started to get a little bit brave. Mentioning, saying who I was to other people.
And this was trusted colleagues and friends. You're just kind of sure. Were you?
I was testing the water a little bit.
Yeah,
I was testing the water, and one incident, I said to one of my friends, a lot younger than me, in a bar, in a quiet corner, I said, "I've got something to tell you. I don't think I'm going to be in the Air Force much longer." And he was a bit shocked, and I told him why. And he stepped back, and I thought that this was a bad reaction. And he stepped back and looked at me and told me that, he wasn't happy with that. And in fact, he used the word disgusted. And I was a little bit worried because this was a negative reaction. And then he said, "I've got lots of gay friends, and I've got the most wonderful dress sense. What went wrong with you?"
A question you're still pondering? Or?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that one never got better.
So joking aside, his reaction then was accepting?
Everybody's reaction that I had then was positive. But one of my close friends, he said to me, he said, "Charlie, be careful. You're releasing information now, and basically sooner or later somebody will get hold of that who doesn't like you."
Let's just put this in context. It's 1999 now.
Yep.
It's still illegal to serve in the British military and be homosexual.
Yeah, it was still
lesbian,
at that time. Yeah.
So the warning was a fair one, and it was done in a friendly gesture.
Yeah, absolutely.
What was your reaction when he said that?
I knew that it was only a matter of time before the cat was out of the bag, type of thing. I really did. I felt like I was already on a downhill, not a downhill. So I was on a roll. This was what was going to happen sooner or later. And
what happened next?
One morning, just a couple of days later, I was working on an aircraft, and this same friend of mine came out in a Land Rover to pick me up, and he said, "Charlie, you've got to go and see the warrant officer."
Who is basically God when it comes to sort of a flight line.
Yeah, exactly. The engineering warrant officer on the squadron is God. I mean, I was a senior NCO, so we were a bit closer with him than closer in the clouds with him than others. But this was a brand new warrant officer that I'd never actually spoken to. He'd only been on the squadron a matter of 4 or 5 days.
And what was the conversation that followed?
So my flight sergeant, an old boy from the same city as me, Hull, originally, he had to come in to the warrant officer's office with me, and he asked me, he said, "What's this about, Charlie? I don't know. And do you know?" And I had a good idea, but I didn't say anything. So we went in and sat in the office, and Sam, the warrant officer, basically said to me that he'd been called into work the evening before by another senior NCO who'd said that apparently I'd allegedly told people that I was homosexual. And Sam said to me, "I'm going to ask you a straight question, pardon the pun, $64,000 question, are you a homosexual?" And I knew at that point that I either lied or, would anybody ever trust me again? So I told him I was. Sam said that it wasn't the answer he was hoping I would make, but he didn't have a problem with me. You could see that this was... he's a very nice guy, still my friend to this day. He said he didn't have a problem with me, but he asked Bob, my flight sergeant, to go and get coffee for us both, and go take me to Bob's office, my flight sergeant's, and Sam, the warrant officer, would make some calls and see where we needed to go from there. Well, poor old Bob, this 50-year-old flight sergeant, he could barely speak. He was absolutely floored by what had just come out in the office, by what had just been said. And Sam, my warrant officer, said, "Charlie, will you go and get Bob a coffee and take Bob to his office?" And in all honesty, I think it was that moment even though I knew that this was going to be a role and I was going to lose my job, it was that moment in time that I knew everything would be okay, that I wasn't going to be, that it was going to be accepted, even though I was going to lose my job. It wasn't going to be a bad process, because there was going to be humour there, and this was the only way I was going to get through this, really. So.
And thus the process of what's known in the military as an administrative discharge began.
Yes,
what happened next on that day?
I was told to change into civilian clothing by OC Personnel Management Squadron, and then I go back into work. So
that's like HR, isn't it, for
yeah,
personnel from the military?
Basically HR. And the guy was absolutely correct with me. You know, always everything was done in the Air Force. Everybody was friendly. There was no There was no form of interrogation or anything like that. Everything was done. The RAF were dealing with an administrative process. So I basically changed into my civilian clothes and went down to the squadron. And then there was one thing I'd promised my flight sergeant that I would do, was I had to break the news to the rest of the squadron. And as one of the characters on the squadron, I was one of the kind of the junta on the squadron. So I walked into the crew room in civvies. Some of the boys were asking why I wasn't in uniform. You know, was I skiving off doing something or whatever? So I switched off the television, called everybody into the crew room, and hopped up onto the pool table. And basically, I told everybody, you know, exactly what it was, that I was leaving the squadron, I was leaving Germany, and I was leaving the Royal Air Force.
And what was the reaction of your friends? These are people you've been in some sticky situations with.
Yeah, these are people, you know, I mean, okay, this was my second tour on that squadron, but I'd been on the squadron about a year and a half at this point, but there were guys on the squadron that I'd worked with for the last 20 years. And some of them were still shocked at the revelation that I'd come out, because they had no idea. Some of the wives and girlfriends did, believe it or not. They actually said, "When did you ever see Charlie try and pull a bird?" and they had to,
it works.
Yeah. Honestly, and that was how it was.
Which is incredible, because you're about to lose your entire career for something that ultimately 99.99% of the people you work with every single day didn't give a stuff about.
No, two of the electricians, when I hopped down off the pool table, two of my electrician corporals came over to me quietly and said, "Charlie, your coming out party on Friday, would you be bothered if we turned up in drag?" And I said, I've lost my job, not my sense of humour.
Yeah.
And I mean, the lads built me a closet in the squadron bar. Yeah. You know, this is
for your leaving party.
For my leaving party, for my coming out party, they built me from an old wardrobe from married quarters, from the married quarters store, with a big sign on the front of it saying Charlie's Closet. And I had to go into this, and then my junior engineering officer, who's kind of my boss on the engineering side, he knocked on the door, and I had to. All the doors fell off. They were held on with matchsticks and cigarette papers.
Typical quarter furniture.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that was a good one, actually. But and in front of all my pilots and navigators and all the other engineers, we just, you know, had a massive party, and it's still spoken about in the old Tornado guys. Charlie's coming out party was legendary.
Must be a reason why I'm making examples of you.
And that upset me, because it was why we had such a good party, and, you know, when they made my speech and gave me my presents, it was all nice things they said about me, but bottom line was I was getting booted out of the Air Force for being gay.
Your discharge happened at the end of June.
Yes.
In 1999. In January 2000, not for you, but for the system, things changed.
Yes, yeah, exactly. In some point in January 2000, they changed the rules and said it was okay to be gay in the British military, and then it was okay.
So 6 months, less than 6 months after you were discharged administratively,
yep,
you'd have been fine.
Yes, yeah. If I could have.
How does that feel now? What does that leave you?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I got a solicitor because I knew that this was something to take to court. In the January, he called me to say the lead cases had gone through, the law had been changed. He then said to me, "We got two options here. We either continue with a case for the European Court of Human Rights, or I can try and get you back in the RAF." Now, this is 6 months down the line. I've got a job at Manx Airlines, working at Ronald's Way. I enjoyed it. I'd got my first licence already as an engineer. And although I never had a problem with the RAF, my problem was always with the Ministry of Defence policy. There's a point that when positive discrimination came in, now I could have seen myself going back into the RAF with holding the same seniority, and then suddenly I would probably be promoted to chief early, and my friends who would have supported me normally would probably, there would have been an element that said, he's just getting that because he's gay, yeah, and then I'm pretty sure that I would have been posted onto the Red Arrows, and it would have been, this is the way that with positive discrimination works, and I think there would have been a time when it was, he's just getting that because, and I think that the RAF would have used me as some kind of diversity model.
That's just sort of moving the story to its conclusion. There is an independent review which is happening at the moment, and what's that about? Who's doing it, and what are you hoping that it sort of shows?
Yes, so there's an independent review into the pre-2000 ban on homosexuals serving in the British military. It's been done by the Duchy of Lancaster, and it's been chaired by Lord Atherton, who was the country's first openly gay law lord, a QC. What they're looking to do is to find out what the effect of the ban was on people's lives, financially, mentally, and they want to address it. I think the review is due to be completed next May, and then they will make recommendations to government, whoever's in at the time, to address the situation. Yeah, with forms that certainly. With an apology, because that's something that's never been forthcoming, and through one of the charities involved with LGBTQ veterans fighting with pride, they want to identify these veterans, and many of them have never been apologised to, and that seems to be quite an important thing for a lot of veterans, an apology. But of course, it's got to be financial. It's, that's the only way they can do it, and they've got to do it quickly. Once this review is completed, the government, and there seems to be an appetite for the government from the government to get this over and done with and put to bed for finally. They've got to do it in a short time frame, because people affected by this aren't getting any younger, and to me, it's the loss of pension rights.
We mentioned that. We should point out that things are very, very different across the board now. Tri-service, the acceptance and the integration of people from within the LGBTQ plus community is huge, and senior officers who transitioned and whatever else. It's a very different world. But the inquiry, I'm getting the impression from you that the financial thing is one thing, but an apology is probably the bigger thing?
At the moment, I'd like a proper financial settlement, to be honest. But the apology. The apology from the MOD, which was never forthcoming. I've never had a problem with the Royal Air Force. The Royal Air Force treated me with dignity throughout the process of my discharge, and I'm still in touch with all of my RAF friends. In fact, I'm the vice chair of the squadron, the squadron that I got booted out of in 1999 when I was kicked out of the Air Force. I'm the chair of the Squadron Association. And nothing changes. We're still the same people. My mates are still my mates. But we've got to have proper financial settlement. And there are some, when you listen to some of the horror stories from other people who are submitting evidence at the moment for this independent review, some of the real horror stories of the way that they were treated in the 70s and in the 80s. It really is terrible. Electroshock therapy, things like it's crazy.
You've been listening to Charlie's story on Manx Radio. You can hear the podcast anytime online at manxradio.com.